What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and as I'm sure you all know, every so often we get a video. We get a video in the middle of the night or whenever it is, when all the musing happens, and that just happens to be one of these videos. They don't happen too often, maybe once every few months. But anyway, let's get going with this one and see how it goes. As usual, this video, they don't usually get edited. They don't usually get too much done with them, but we'll see how it ends up. Anyway, in this one, we're going to talk about a non-gaming topic, and we're going to talk about wrestling. Now, you've probably very, very, very rarely ever heard me mention wrestling outside of one or two very specific parts, and even then, only recently. But wrestling, for me at least anyway, has been kind of important at various points in my life. I grew up watching wrestling when I was much, much younger, naturally, like almost everyone. I started with the WWF, and I've come in and out of it, and now I'm back into it, and that's why I want to talk about it a little bit. Obviously, I've been getting back into it through All Elite Wrestling, AEW. I have no interest in whatever WW, I was going to call it WWF out of habit, but I have no interest in whatever WWE is offering these days. More in detail on all of this later. But let's start at the beginning real quick. I'll try to get through it as quick as possible, but I can't promise anything. Like I said, I started way, way back in the day as a kid in the early 90s watching WWF. And I always knew it as the in your house generation, not generation, in your house era, but I believe officially that era was called the new generation or the next generation, whatever it is. But I'm talking Sergeant Slaughter, Ultimate Warrior. Who else did we have? There's so many. Big Boss Man, Hulk Hogan. You had all of those. That's the era I'm talking about. Doink the Clown, Million Dollar Man, Ted DiBiase, Jake the Snake Roberts, Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, whatever you want to call him, Diesel, Undertaker with the purple gloves and the purple boots. You know the era. It was colorful. It was WWF in your house. It was very difficult for me to watch back then because they didn't show wrestling properly here. They would only show one or two kind of offshoots or clip shows and whatnot at first. And even then, naturally, they wouldn't be live. You'd see them every Saturday morning. You'd see like Livewire or Heat or something like that. Eventually, down the line, they'd start showing an edited, cut down version of Raw, as well as the pretty much the entire show of SmackDown. But obviously, that was much, much later, given the nature of those shows. Now, that brings us to the other part. Naturally, I started watching with that, and I followed as much as I could because, like I said, clip shows, it was very difficult to keep up with it. And when they did start showing a little bit more, you could only get it on specific sports channels. And of course, because of the time difference here in Ireland versus when it aired in the US, even though it was pre-taped a lot of the time, it was still a bit of a problem. For example, Monday Night Raw would usually show on maybe Friday nights over here. And of course, I didn't have that sports channel, so unless I was staying in a friend's house who had that channel and liked wrestling, well, I was kind of just relegated to the usual stuff that I'd watch. But then, like I said, eventually they would start showing edited versions of Raw, cut down versions of Raw, and SmackDown and all too. But that's when what everyone knows happened, and when it came to like back then in we'll just call it the in your house era, I loved wrestling so much. That was amazing. It was the kind of thing you'd get into arguments in school about with your friends. It was that big and that important. And then around the mid 90s, when the Monday Night Wars kicked off, yes, they actually showed a bit of WCW here at the time. What happened, funny enough, was we had Cartoon Network. Every night, Cartoon Network would end at 9 p.m. and it would be replaced with TNT, which would eventually be renamed to TCM, Turner Classic Movies. But it was TNT. And every Friday night, they would show Monday Night Nitro, or WCW Monday Nitro. Yeah, Monday Nitro is the proper name. But I realized, again, because of differences, time differences and whatnot too, pre-taped and a couple of days late and all that. But hell, the world was a very different place back then. The internet was a very different place. And TV was a very, very different place back then. But that's where it was so different. As someone who had just grew up on WWF, and even then it was felt like only scraps of WWF. And then we see Monday Nitro, and Nitro started. I can't remember exactly what year they started showing Monday Nitro over here, but it was definitely pre NWO because obviously Bash at the Beach in 1996 and whatnot. But it was definitely before that, so you had time to invest, to learn the people, learn their stories, learn everything that was going on, and then of course it just blew up. Nitro was insane at that point. WCW was kicking the absolute shit out of WWF for so many, what was it, a year and a half, 2 years or something at that point. And it was so good. You had all these faces that you knew, not just baby faces, but I mean legit faces that you recognize, coming from WWF into WCW. And that was just so crazy to me. I mean, you had all these people. You had Lex Luger, Rick Rude, Ric Flair. You had the, I can't remember if the Steiner Brothers started in WWF and then went to WCW or the other way around. You had all of them. You had Scott Hall. You had Kevin Nash. The Macho Man Randy Savage. There's so many of them. Bret the Hitman Hart eventually even. There were so many of them. And I'm not even going to get into the Montreal Screwjob here. Don't even worry about that. But it was so good. It was so crazy. It was such an amazing time for wrestling because it was so different. And that, of course, was even compounded when WWF tried to fight back. They were losing so badly, they brought in the Attitude Era, something that many people consider the best era of wrestling. I'm not gonna lie, the Attitude Era was probably the best era of wrestling I've ever seen. The wrestling itself was good quality, I don't care what anyone says, but you also had all the characters, the storylines, the story arcs, the plot points, all the drama, all the other stuff. It was so, I was a teenager at the time. I was a young teenager. So it was still it was edgy as fuck, basically. And that made something I loved, wrestling, even better. And of course, then, you had the likes of Deborah and Sable, Trish Stratus, Woo Lad. That just compounded it even more. Of course, that's not to leave out the lovely ladies of WCW. DDP's wife was, ooh, not to mention there's a couple of others in there too. But Kimberly, call me. But it's just so good. It was so fantastic. And sure, eventually WCW would just kind of lose their way. But they had so many great things in the meantime. NWO, New World Order, is still probably the best, if not the top three thing to ever happen in wrestling. It's crazy how much that impacted WCW and wrestling in general with the WWF. Even to this day, there's something I'll get to very much further down the line that I feel is such a heavy influence by NWO. I mean, they even tried to fight back in WWF with DX. I think DX, I'm pretty sure DX predates NWO. Not 100% sure on that. Don't feel like looking it up right now. But anyway, it was crazy. And sure, like I said, they lost their way eventually and they just went insane. Fuck you, Vince Russo. But there was so many good things, and everyone forgets that. Everyone looks back and just says, "Oh, WCW was a disaster. It was a mess." No, absolutely not. Sure, it became a disaster and it became a mess towards the end. Hence why they were eventually went out of business and essentially, well, not went out of business, but I guess bought and shut down and pretty much. But I mean, you had there was so much Goldberg stuff, which was crazy. All the WCW stuff, not WCW, all the NWO stuff. The fact that the product in general was so good that it could beat the long-running, long-standing, highly regarded, highly whatever you want to call it, competition of the WWF at that point, almost putting them out of business. That's crazy. Like, I remember Sting. I remember when Sting disappeared. Like, he was the bright, colorful Sting. He got screwed over. He disappeared for 6 months. And he came back as the Crow-esque Sting. The one that was just insane. And I haven't gone and checked this myself, but Sting was basically one of the top baby faces of the entire company at the time. And obviously there was a lot of dialogue, a lot of promos being cut, because story was part of it too. There's reports, again, I haven't checked this myself, But apparently, Sting, who is basically their top babyface and whatnot, when he came back, he was on TV for pretty much an entire year without speaking once. But it was so well done that it got the point across, and Sting got over like a house on fire. It's crazy. Imagine that. Imagine you're one of the top faces of your company who went from all this previous talking, all these promos, these packages, everything, to coming back, not speaking a word for about a year, and burning a house down, or bringing a house down, raising the roof, whatever it is, every single time he's in a match, he's on screen, whatever it is. It's crazy. And that brings me to essentially what killed wrestling for me. Because I was still watching WCW, and I was still watching, because eventually they started showing Thunder as well when they moved on, and they had Nitro as well, and then they would show Thunder after, when WCW Thunder eventually started several years later. So they would show that, they would show Nitro at 9, and then Thunder at, I think it was 11 or something, whatever it was. And that was fantastic. It was good to watch. Of course, by the time Thunder actually started, it was kind of going downhill a little. But at the same time, I was still watching WWF at the same time. I wanted to see what was different, what they were offering and all too. Of course, by then, we had SmackDown. So there was more to offer in that regard. Now, here's where it gets kind of messy. Trust me, if you think this video is messy so far, woo lad, it's about to get even messier. That's when WCW went out of business. Now, when WCW were shut down, we all know that they were bought out by the McMahons, by Vince McMahon, and this is actually what killed wrestling for me. Not that they were bought out and shut down, but with the purchase of WCW, it gave the possibility for the best wrestling angle, the best wrestling arc, and the best wrestling era in history, in my opinion. Now, there's of course people out there who are going to say something about the 70s or the 80s or whatnot. With everything that was in WCW in those maybe 5 or 6 years, hell, we call it maybe 10 years. They shut down, I think it was 2001. So let's go from like 1991 to 1992 all the way up to 2001. And everything is WWF in general. When you look at everything that happened in WCW, all the wrestlers, the stories, the drama, the feuds between the characters in WCW, as well as the whole rivalry between WCW and WWF, for that eventually to all be in one building, essentially, they could have done so much more. Now, we all know, we've all heard about the invasion angle, the invasion era, whatever it is you want to know. Essentially, 2001, when they bought and purchased WCW, they started bringing in the wrestlers. Some of the wrestlers. They started bringing in some of the wrestlers from WCW to bring them into WWF. Some of them would make it long term. Some of them would make it medium term. Some of them would make it short term. Some of them didn't even make it at all. Now, the big problem with this, I'm not sure if this was done on purpose. I'm not sure if it was done because of poor creative or writing or whatever it is. Or maybe, and probably most likely, because we all know that how Vince McMahon is a bit of a crazy psychopath, but most likely a lot of this was done on purpose to squash the opposition. It's almost like they said, yeah, we win, we're just gonna shit all over you. And we're going to fuck your characters up, fuck your personas up, and we're going to beat you in wrestling, in our business, in the ring, over and over and over and over and over. Now, that didn't fully apply to everyone. Some of it was handled pretty decently at first. But the big thing about the invasion angle and the invasion era is that so much talent was squandered. One that always sticks to me. I was a big DDP fan. Big Diamond Dallas Page fan. Not just because of his wife, or not just because of DDP yoga, but I was a big DDP fan. Who wasn't? Who wasn't a big DDP fan? He was fantastic in WCW. Everyone loved DDP for the most of it all. There was one or two little stints he had that weren't great, but just DDP was great. Then they brought him into WWF. Does anyone remember the whole Undertaker's wife stalker angle that turned out to be DDP? I mean, that just buried DDP for so long in WWF. It just really, really put him down. No one could take him seriously. No one could give a shit about him. Eventually, of course, he would get over, but that was a long, long time down the line. So many wasted potential, so much wasted potential in the invasion angle. Now, of course, some of it did do fantastic. You had the when the Radicals came in. I can't remember. I think they were called the Radicals in WWF, at least anyway. When you had like Perry Saturn and Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero. Naturally, Eddie would go on to be huge. So would Benoit. But there's so much other stuff in there as well. Now, I'm not saying you don't have to bring in absolutely everyone. You don't have to make Disco Inferno your world champion. Shout out to Disco Inferno, by the way. I don't think he deserves all the hate he gets, but I feel like there was this immense setup when the invasion era happened. And then it just, so much of it fell flat on its face. So much of it was screwed over. So much of it was just wasted. And of course, we never got some of the dream matches that we always wanted. Everyone, I mean absolutely everyone. It probably would have been the biggest match since Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat if you had Goldberg and Stone Cold Steve Austin in the height of both of their popularities. Imagine that. Imagine a world, how it would have went crazy back in, let's call it 2001, if you had Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Goldberg. Now, I know lately, apparently they had an Undertaker Goldberg, but who cares 20 years later? When these guys aren't the biggest thing since sliced bread. Okay, fair enough. Undertaker's always the biggest thing since sliced bread. But these guys can't work as well. I don't want to shit all over them, but I mean, you can tell by seeing it. You can tell by reading about it. The fact that they're 20 years older. And, well, of course, from the all intents and purposes and the records of the match that they have had, it was just an absolute mess. But could you imagine stuff like that? Quality talent like that. Obviously, let's look at some of the lighter guys as well. Back then, you had Rey Mysterio Jr., Billy Kidman, to name but a few of them. You had people like Ultimo Dragon and all as well. There's way more that I could go on and list, but Eddie Guerrero, he was a nice high flyer as well. So you could imagine all of them properly utilized with guys like the Hardy Boys. Imagine that. Edge and Christian, even to an extent. I always consider Edge and Christian kind of mid-card guys, size-wise, and maybe not just size-wise, popularity-wise and all that. But there's just so much that felt wasted. And that's when I stopped watching wrestling. I stopped watching wrestling in 2001. I believe it was in around the time, it was during the invasion angle when they just messed that up completely. It was before all the current popular guys were in. I stopped watching before Brock Lesnar showed up. I stopped watching before John Cena showed up. I stopped watching before Randy Orton showed up. I pretty much don't know anyone else on the entire roster. But yeah, they were the big ones. I mean, you hear the names and stuff too, even when you're out of wrestling. They're just that popular and they're that big. But it just goes to show that when I had kind of always wanted to get back into wrestling, but I'd always see clips. You'd see clips on YouTube. People would link you clips. You'd see clips on Twitter, whatever it is. And ever since I'd been had the entertaining the possibility of maybe getting back into wrestling, it's been maybe 4 or 5 years at this point. But every time I'd see these clips, every time I'd research or look a little bit into it and all, everything that because there was really only properly the WWE. Obviously, I know there's stuff like Ring of Honor, TNA, Impact, the rest of that stuff. But realistically, it seemed like WWE was the only proper option, if you will. And everything I saw that was presented to me in these clips, in what I was reading, in these videos, whatever it was, it just seemed like the product was not for me. There was something so fake and stereotypical and plastic and staged about it. I'm not saying, oh, wrestling's fake, this, that, and the other. That's not what I'm getting on about. When it not overtly, yeah, overtly, is that, yes, overtly, that's it. When it's in your face about it the whole time. About just how much of a pony show the entire thing is. It just takes you out of it. And of course, it doesn't help that I grew up in the in your house era, in the attitude era, when people were getting, there was blood, there was tits, there was hard way, there was everything. And now, of course, we're in like the, what do they call it? The PG era, the G era, the Universal era. I don't know what it's called, but it's what they can and can't do on TV has completely changed now because of, I know, the markets and privately traded or publicly traded company and blah blah blah, and TV standards and practices and all that too. But that's where AEW comes in. And it was earlier this year when people told me about AEW, and I looked into it, I heard a bit about it, and it sounded good. It sounded like a good viable option, and something that might be a proper way for me to get in on it. And the way I looked at it, the thing that made me so happy about it is that, sure, I know that some of these people were in different wrestling promotions before. Some of them were in different wrestling promotions with each other before. Some of them had pre-existing storylines and whatnot too. But it sounded like when all of this starts up, I could get in and watch this on the ground floor with having to need next to no investment beforehand. I don't need to go back and watch New Japan for a year and a half to learn about Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. I know they had a match at some point and it was a fairly high profile one. I don't know who won, or I don't care about any of that stuff. They have their own storylines, they have their own characters, their own development, their own whatever it is, starting from essentially scratch. And that's something I can get in on. So I watched All In. I watched Double or Nothing. I watched Fyter Fest. I watched Fight for the Fallen. I watched All Out. And now I'm watching AEW Dynamite and AEW Dark. But it's so good and it's so refreshing. And sure, like I said, a lot of these people, some of the guys I talk with about AEW, they tell me, it's like, oh, you might not understand this or you might not understand that. You might not, when he showed up, you might not understand why it's such a big deal. Because I don't know these people. So I'm okay with that. For example, when John Moxley showed up, everyone went crazy. And they said to me, it's like, you might not understand that. I'm like, okay, I don't care. That's fine. You can explain it to me. Tell me why that's a big deal. Like, he was in WWF, WWE, or I think it was NXT. He was in the WWE at some capacity. He was kind of liked, but they buried him. He didn't get over, and he was miserable. And now, look at John Moxley in AEW. He's having the time of his life, it comes across as. And there seems to be so many people that works for. And sure, you can make some comparisons to previous promotions. You can make some comparisons, even if they were or weren't in them. You can make a comparison, for example, I said much earlier at the start of this video, how influential NWO was. Here we are 2 weeks into AEW's TV on the second episode of Dynamite. You could even argue at the end of the first episode, and we have what is essentially their version of the NWO, the Inner Circle, Chris Jericho and the lot. So it's that influential, and yes, you can make some obvious comparisons in that too, but there's usually so much difference that it works. And obviously, hopefully, it's going to work going forward. The ratings seem to be pretty strong. The reception for AEW is pretty strong. I know I'm enjoying it. Sure, nothing is perfect. Even during the Attitude Era and Walls, there was a few things that weren't perfect. It's the same with AEW. Of course, it's not perfect. But it's enough to get me back in. And that is something that's really, really important. Now, before we go as well, I do just want to quickly talk about one or two of the talent in AEW, because I have my own feelings on them. Some of the stuff I don't like. Some of it I feel indecisive and middle of the road on. Some of them I love. Some of them I used to like and now I'm not liking at all. Some of them I used to not like and now I'm liking and they're getting over. So there's some people I'd like to see in different roles and different capacities as well. And a quick example of this, I realized that when you think about it, because AEW is currently a smaller promotion with a smaller roster, I can't wait to see down the line when they open it up a bit more, when they have not only a bigger roster, but when they have more belts, more different divisions, more classes, whatever. Like right now, for example, I believe there's only 3 belts. There's the AEW Championship, there is the Women's Championship, and the Tag Team Championship. I can't wait till they bring in more of them. Maybe like a second tier championship, like I think it was the Intercontinental Championship or the Intercontinental title when I used to watch the old school stuff. But I mean, you have a couple of people, like for example, they're pushing Adam Page as a big guy, and Adam Page, his matches are good so far. I realize that they're trying to push him as a top level talent and all. I don't see it personally, which is part of why I can't wait to see them bring in maybe a second tier championship, something like that, because I could definitely easily see Adam Page as, let's call it the AEW TNT championship. I could easily see him as an AEW TNT champion for the second belt, stuff like that too. And there's a couple of others as well. Jericho is obviously in there. I have a couple of choice words for Jericho. His promos are fantastic. His promo in the second episode and at the end of the first episode, but specifically the one in his big segment in the second episode, was just fantastic. It's one of the best things I've heard. I used to be a huge Chris Jericho fan back in WCW. I was a pretty big fan of Jericho back when he first came to WWF, because we all know that Raw is Jericho. But there was one or two other things. He looks like shit. I'm sorry. I realize he's a lot older than a lot of these people, but there are people his age in wrestling that look considerably better. Now, he can still go. He's still good. The matches and the quality of his work is so good. But, dog, you need to lose that finisher. That Judas effect. No. I know you're going for the whole Fozzy thing, but really just a spinning back elbow is your finisher? Really? I just don't get it. But there's some other good ones in there too. Like some of them, you've got singles that I'd love to see in a tag team together. You've got tag team that I'd love to see split into singles, and specific people get a push and whatnot too. I mean, it's crazy. The Lucha Bros. I'm not a huge Lucha guy, but the Lucha Bros are crazy. I love them. They're so good to watch. Now, fair enough. Unfortunately, a lot of that means they do have to work with the Young Bucks team. I am not much a fan of, but with the matches and the style they do, I guess I can deal with it, if you will. But I can't wait to see what they do down the line. They're such a good team to watch as well, and I can't wait to see that when they recruit more teams, when they have other teams that can work well with them, even if they're not going crazy and doing like triple swan dives off 7 feet ladders through 800 tables. There's so much they can do with them. And that's what I want to see. And that brings me to the next one. Private Party. They're currently my new hotness. Private Party started good. The first time I saw them, they were good. I saw that first moonsault by Mark Quinn. That was crazy. That was fucking glorious. I saw that. I'm like thinking, holy shit, I haven't seen something that amazing, that fluid, that effortless, and just looked that good. And not to mention the height he got on it. It was one of the best ones I've ever seen. And then he did it again the other night. It was crazy. I can't wait to see how they go forward. You know what I want to see? The Lucha Bros versus Private Party. That's what I want to see. But sticking with tag teams for a second, I'm going to mix it up. Because a tag team that I would like kind of broken up or modified in a way. Jurassic Express. Now, Jurassic Express could work in one way. I think it could work properly in a two-man team. I would like to see it as a two-man team. Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus. Now, I realize that they need to have Marco Stunt in there, who I can't stand. But I realize that they have to keep him in there because you can't beat Luchasaurus. If you beat Luchasaurus, it kills his character. He's a fucking tank. He's huge. He's ripped. He's agile as fuck. And he hits like a truck. Luchasaurus could be their Undertaker. So what I would love to see is if they either got rid of Marco Stunt. But see, that's why, because I know you can't beat Luchasaurus. They don't want to beat it seems like they don't want to beat Jungle Boy too badly just yet, because they're probably going to do something with him, give him a push or something. But if you could break that up, give Luchasaurus a big solo push, maybe even change his gimmick a little bit if they wanted to. But if they pushed him as their like Undertaker, if you will, that would be crazy. Luchasaurus, I could see beating Jericho or whoever for the AEW World Championship. I mean, that's good stuff. But you got Cody Rhodes. Cody's obviously real good stuff. I'm not too familiar with Cody as a wrestler outside of this, because he was never in WWF or WWE, whatever it is, when I watched it. But so far his stuff has been great. I can't complain about that at all. I'm looking at the list of stuff here we got here. What's this? Shima. I think it's Shima. Shima's work so far has been fantastic. I don't like to say work as in like the mark term and all, but I just mean the quality of the wrestling and the quality of his performance has been really good. I can't wait to see what happens with Shima going forward. Here's a good example, actually. Darby Allin. When I started seeing Darby Allin at first, I was just no. I thought it was one of those cringy gimmicks. But as they've gone on further and further, as they've changed it, they've developed Darby Allin a little bit, helped with the TV aspect instead of just being a proper pay-per-view once every so often. But I don't know, Darby Allin's starting to get over with me a little bit better. I think he's getting over a little bit more with the crowd as well, it seems. Just it's going to be interesting to see where so much of it goes. Dustin Rhodes as well. That match between Dustin and Cody, it's possibly the best match that they've had on the entire anything of AEW. That was fantastic. And Dustin can wrestle like a champ. If you've seen him in any of the stuff he's done, Dustin's fantastic. But again, despite his age, he's roughly the same age as Chris Jericho. And okay, he wears the suits and the body suits and the face paint and all as well. But he can go. He can absolutely go. It's so good. Let me see what else we got here. Jake Hager. He's obviously only just come into it, so I can't wait to see what they do with him. Jake Hager is also someone I could see going at the AEW World Champion level. I mean, like I said, there's a couple of others that I could only see at the second tier, but yeah, I could definitely see Jake Hager as the top tier stuff. I don't know where I feel, where I sit about people like Jimmy Havoc and Joey Janela. They're still at the middle at the moment. But then you've got people like Jon Moxley. I already spoke about Jon Moxley. Sean Spears, you could bring him. He's at the same tier, the same quality stuff. They have so much potential, and I can't wait to see what they do with them. There's other people too, like Kenny Omega's in there. I mean, you say what you want about Kenny Omega. Unfortunately, some of the stuff outside AEW has killed Kenny Omega from me before I even could start potentially getting into him. What have we got? MJF. MJF is... They're making the heel turn so obvious, but we know they're not going to do it yet. It's coming eventually. We all know MJF is going to heel turn on Cody. Eventually. It's so obvious. I mean, they've done it to what, two? They've done it at least twice, maybe three times that they've teased it at this point. So we don't know when it's going to happen, but his wrestling is good. His promos are off the chain, so it can go so well. But you know what can't go so well? Fucking Orange Cassidy. I can't stand Orange Cassidy. Now, I will admit, it's kind of funny to see him diving from the top rope onto six guys on the outside with his hands in his pockets. I'm not gonna lie. My little dog pockets, he can do that, and that is kind of funny. But that's not winning him over with me. He's not getting over. Every time I see him, I just think, fuck's sake, Orange Cassidy. And you can't even dislike him as a heel because he's obviously not a heel. So I don't know. Then again, it's not all for me. What do we got? Santana and Ortiz. I haven't. I'm indifferent on them. The only thing I don't understand is what the hell is Ortiz's tongue gimmick. I see that the first time I saw it, I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's a little bit insanity. It's a little bit going crazy, a little bit mad dog or whatever. But then you see it again and again, and you're just thinking, it's a bit much. It's a bit much. Oh, you know who I'm a big fan of. I have been since the first time I saw him. He's wrestled twice in AEW. Pac. Pac is my boy. Pac is like my number one solo boy for the moment. Pac is the shit. I could see him being not only I could see him being AEW champion. He's top tier. He has the potential to be top tier for me, at least in that way. Maybe not Sammy Guevara. I don't think so. But he's getting in on the tongue gimmick as well. It's just kind of weird. SCU, I'm in the middle with SCU. I don't hate them. I don't think they're quality. They can definitely wrestle. Their gimmick is a little bit strange. I think it's a bit weird. And what's the other tag team? The Hybrid 2. I'm kind of indifferent on them. But the good thing about it is you see all the variety in there too. Let me see. We're coming to the end of this list here too. Wardlow is going to be good. They only did a nice little premium package for him when they showed him off. I can't wait till he actually shows up and does some stuff. He could potentially be some AEW champion material, or at least up at that tier, because, well, he definitely looks the part, and hopefully he can live up to the part. But they also have a decent women's division, despite only having a handful of female wrestlers. They're still doing pretty well with it. Not to mention some of them are just so hot, it's crazy. But I'm not the biggest fan of Ali. She gets over with me because of the personality, but that's about it. And she looks really good as a blonde. It's so good with the likes of Awesome Kong and Nyla Rose, because they're so big that they have all these angles that they can do. The whole giant killer, the unstoppable machine kind of stuff. Bea Priestley is pretty hot too, and she's pretty cool. Brandy Rhodes, I don't know what they could go either way with her. Britt Baker, or should I say Britt Baker, is she's Bay too. I hope I can pronounce this correctly. Hikaru Shida, she has some good stuff. They seem to really be focusing on a lot of the female Japanese wrestlers, which is probably a good thing because they all have similar styles and they can all probably have experience working together and all too. And it offers some different stuff from what you might see with just the American wrestlers and all that them too. What else do we have? Riho, my bae Riho, the first AEW Women's Champion. That's warms my heart so much. Initial Riho. And Penelope Ford. She could be proper good stuff. Not only is she smoking hot, but she's really athletic. A lot of gymnastic work in there too. And there's so much good stuff. And of course, I do want to throw out a little extra bit in there, just because, even though not a wrestler, Aubrey Edwards is a quality referee. She's not afraid to get in their face. She doesn't look like she's afraid to be in the ring. She doesn't look like she's afraid to to get in their faces. She takes charge. And I know we all know wrestling's a work, but the beauty of AEW for the most part is it tries to be serious and take it convincingly. I know someone's gonna leave a comment. Oh, you said it's trying to be serious and take it convincingly. What about this, this, and this? Okay, there are one or two things that they take a little bit of liberties with, but the rest of them do it so well, and they bring it in. They present it to you not like it's all a work. They respect it enough. This is something I side with Jim Cornette on this, because he feels the same way about this from obviously watching the Jim Cornette Experience. But he likes wrestlers that take the business seriously, that even though we all know it's a work, they respect it enough they respect the business and respect you as viewers enough to present it as serious as possible, or as realistic as possible, or what, you know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, you have, okay, sure, there are a few things. Luchasaurus obviously isn't a real dinosaur, as much as a shock as that is to some people. But it's good that they do that. And funny enough, this actually goes back to Kenny Omega. This is why I can't take Kenny Omega seriously. Man, I just can't get into Kenny Omega. Now, I only found this out recently, maybe like 2 or 3 months ago, because I had heard, it was actually Jim Cornette, I had heard talking about it, and he was talking about what Kenny Omega, the damage he did to the business, and you can't take him seriously. So I was asking some of the guys, I was like, what's he talking about? What did Kenny Omega do? Then I found out Kenny Omega wrestled a blow-up doll and a 9-year-old girl. That is, I sided with Jim Cornette on that one. I mean, that just, I hate to say that exposes the business, because that sounds like I'm working in it. No. At least the others take it serious enough to not make you think, oh, look at this laugh, this joke that we're watching here. No, I don't like that. I like to be treated a little bit better than that. But anyway, I don't know how long this video has lasted. I've probably been talking for about 20 minutes at this point, but maybe even longer. I haven't looked at the runtime. But that's it. I'm looking forward to more AEW. Hopefully a long relationship with their pay-per-views, with Dynamite, with AEW Dark, and who knows, maybe they'll have a second proper show eventually. Not just AEW Dark. But anyway, in the meantime, I'm looking forward to continue watching it. I'm going to watch it every single week. And yeah, Full Gear is on next month. We'll see how that goes. I can't wait till everything opens up a bit more. They have more solo acts. They have more teams. They have more stories. Maybe they have more championships, more types of matches, whatever it is. Anyway, at the moment, I can just basically look forward to the Philadelphia Street Fight next week between AEW champion Chris Jericho and Darby Allin for the championship match.